Hello and welcome. This is Dan Meyer. I'm editor-in-chief of RCR Wireless News. Thanks for joining us today. Today I'm joined by Paul Margie, who's the partner with the law firm of Harris, Wiltshire, and Grannis. I hope I got that correct, Paul.
Yeah,
They're in Washington, D.C. Thanks for joining us today, Paul. We appreciate it.
thanks for having me.
Great. Well, today we're hoping to talk a little bit about everything that's happening there in D.C., obviously with the FCC. A lot happening there, things going on right now, things are going on, planning for things going on, so a lot happening in D.C., but hoping to get from you, Paul, I guess some insight into some of the bigger topics, net neutrality, incentive auction, things like that'll obviously impact the mobile industry going forward. So hoping maybe start off with I guess a quick kind of start off with the net neutrality issue. Obviously this is a very complicated topic, lots of sides to it. I guess what's your general view of how the FCC so far has approached the net neutrality issue and how they're, I guess, handling and I guess taking into consideration all the various sides and issues that are involved right now with net neutrality?
Sure. Well, it's a giant issue, as you said, and it's one of these hard ones for the FCC because you've got a mix of very detailed, complicated legal issues with other big policy issues that everyone in the country cares about. And so you've got to balance that. You've got to look at these legal issues. You've got to look at the big implications that are both political implications, in the best sense of the word, political implications, and balance a lot of things. You've also got a huge divide between the people that are on the commission, and bridging that divide maybe not possible. And so I don't envy them the task that they have, but that's why they get those big government dollars in their paychecks.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. You're right. I mean, obviously, the two sides on this issue do seem like they're very far apart, and they have definitely put stakes in the ground that seem, difficult to move, even a little bit. So that does seem like it's going to be a huge challenge. I mean, obviously, Wheeler has done a lot to kind of finesse the issue, I think, as much as he can. But at some point, decisions probably have to be made. Do you think we're looking at a decision on this topic anytime in our lifetime, or obviously the next year or so? But I mean, how do you see this playing out, over the next?
I think we're moving towards decision, right? And let me take one step back too to just say, while there is a gulf between where people are on a number of the issues, it's also somewhat striking to look at where we are now in this versus where we were maybe 10 years ago. So 10 years ago, in the beginning of the network neutrality time, there was an even bigger divide, right? There was a question on whether the basic principles of network neutrality were really something that were necessary to have for the internet. And wherever you are on the spectrum, it's striking to me to see that that's not really an issue anymore. You have all the sides saying, look, we understand that neutrality is important. We understand that the internet has to be a place where innovation has can get a foothold. There's great debate on tactics, but the overall strategy of saying that we need an internet that has these characteristics isn't really an issue anymore. And, I think it's worth recognizing that that's the case.
Sure, yeah, that's a good point. You're right. Progress has been made, but yeah, I mean, it's hard to imagine though that it was any more divided than it is now. But obviously, like you said, it was. And so yeah, so it's definitely positive that way. No, I mean, I guess obviously looking at the issues, I mean, for us, we cover a lot of the wireless industry, and mobile has been a part of net neutrality, a growing part of it, it seems. Initially, 10 or 15 years ago, I think mobile was kind of left out of the whole talk because at that time it wasn't, mobile internet wasn't a huge thing and wasn't a big issue. But over the years, it's definitely become more and more of a part of this. Obviously, President Obama came out with his comments a little while ago, somewhat including mobile into the conversation. Not that it hasn't been included before, but bringing it in there as well. Obviously, the FCC has been trying to balance that, and obviously, mobile has a different transport method than a lot of wired internet, so that's a bigger challenge. How do you see, I guess, that mobile angle playing out in this, and do you think it'll be grouped in there, or will be considered separate? How do you see that working out?
Well, I mean, so predicting FCC action is never a wise thing to do. But I will say a couple things. One is that you're right. It is striking how much mobile is in the middle of the conversation now, where it wasn't before, and it's another example of a long-term trend of the FCC and other government agencies seeing mobile as having arrived, right? So you see numbers on the percentage of American households that have only wireless service at home. Mm-hmm. You see the numbers on the impact of the economy of all of these wireless devices. whether those are unlicensed or licensed, whether those are provided by carriers or provided by individual consumers. It's just a big deal, and I think it's at the center of everything. So we see in network neutrality, we see in the E-rate and universal service, we see when we're talking about accessibility and disability rules. Across the board, you're seeing the FCC paying a lot more attention to having equal or closer to equal rules between wireline and wireless services. So I think that's important to see. The second piece is in network neutrality, it's important to see what they mean when they talk about the application of these rules to mobile. Because a lot of folks say, we're talking about landline versus wireless. And in fact, what the FCC is looking at is mobile versus fixed. And so in the original rules, they said, look, there's some wireless services that are considered to be fixed services, and there are some wireless services that are considered to be mobile services. And those that were on the mobile side had characteristics that they thought were different enough that they didn't have the full suite of rules that applied to the fixed guys. So now the question is that going to go away? And so the companies that are arguing that it should not are going to have to demonstrate to the FCC that there is enough difference between a fixed and a mobile operation that different rules apply. And I think there are some issues there that they've raised that the FCC is going to have to really struggle with. The one is spectrum, right? Spectrum is just different, and you do have characteristics of mobile systems that have to rely on limited spectrum resources that make it different. Now the question is whether the FCC thinks that that's different enough than the network neutrality challenges that the fixed guys have to make that different. It certainly seems like the majority of the FCC is leaning towards not establishing a difference between them. And the critical one is this ability to discriminate. So the fixed guys and the mobile guys both have to not block, right? They both have to be transparent. They both can engage in some network neutrality, and it has to be reasonable network neutrality. But this question of whether you can discriminate is the key issue, and it certainly seems like that the chairman is sending signals that that's going away.
Well, it seems like, too, I mean, for that discrimination part of it, I mean, it seems like the FCC needs to have, or needs to put up some pretty definitive explanation or what that means, because it does seem like a lot of these issues, you know, have kind of come up, and there's always, you know, someone says, well, what does that mean exactly? And there's always seems to be like a way out for somebody to kind of get around some of these issues. So it seems like that's one of those that really has to be laid out, you know, in pretty much black and white, so there's no way around it.
Yeah, I think you're right. So predictability I think that, at least for my clients, they all feel that the fighting over what the rules are is really, really important. But establishing predictable rules may be even more important in some of these cases than having Rule A versus Rule B. And there is fear, I think, within this area that you're going to have rules that, once on the book, are hard to understand how they're going to be enforced, especially when we have a much more aggressive enforcement bureau at the FCC now. The question is, what is that going to mean in practice? I doubt that the FCC is going to give a lot of certainty as to how these rules are going to work. My guess is that they're going to rely on a case-by-case jurisprudential approach to understanding what discrimination is or isn't, and that's going to produce real challenges.
Is that the correct way to do it? I mean, obviously, I know when you were here recently at the Silicon Flatirons event, I know there was one of the panels you're on was the command and control issue. That you know, maybe somewhat related to this or not, but you know, a lot of talk on that was the fact that you know, how do you I guess steer an industry in certain directions from a regulatory point of view, and it seems like that is, you know, again, the arguments that were made, you know, obviously both sides have good arguments in this, but in the end, only one can really win, it seems. I mean, obviously, the more options are out there, it does seem to decrease the predictability aspect of it, I guess.
Yeah, on this particular one, right? So the question of Title II versus 706, I think whether you have a Title II approach or a 706 approach, you could still have de facto the same implications on the ground afterwards if the FCC were to do it. And I think a lot of the companies have said, yeah, that's the case. We understand that there might be one or the other. There are just additional risks with Title II or additional risks with 706, depending on your point of view. But yeah, you're right. No matter which one it is, the amount of predictability is going to be very difficult to say. If you're advising a company and saying, all right, we have rules, it's day network neutrality +1, And so what do you advise your clients to do? Well, you look at the rules, you try to figure out what the FCC might do, and I think everyone's going to be looking hard to see whether the quality of the rules are high enough that you could give that good advice. I worry about that.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting part of it. Yeah, right. That's and obviously, it'll definitely keep the lawyers busy, not to the profession, which obviously has a big part of this, but definitely keep you guys busy.
The better the rules are, the less the lawyers will have to do, and I think that's a good thing, right? If someone can read the rules and really understand what it means for their business, then that's going to be the mark of a good rule.
Yeah, well, luckily, history has shown us the FCC has not done a very good job at that. So, but we'll see how that plays out. But anyway, do you think there's a timing aspect of this as well too? Because obviously, the current administration's in place for a couple more years at least. Hopefully, this thing could be done before then. But it does seem like there is a bit of perhaps a line out there that if the administration obviously changes, if the politics there change, this net neutrality thing could go a different way totally. I mean, obviously, Wheeler has got a certain viewpoint on this. If this drags out more than 2 or 3 years, are we looking at a whole different model here?
I would be shocked if this isn't concluded before the end of the Obama administration.
Good. There we go. Line in the sand there. I like it.
I would, now that doesn't mean that it won't be concluded by the courts, right? Yeah. We could be back again. But I would be shocked if the FCC does not release an order establishing rules in network neutrality before the end of the Obama administration.
Got it. Okay. All right. Well, maybe moving on off this topic a little bit, but staying in the courts, obviously, the incentive auction process recently got pushed back to a 2016 timeframe. I know the FCC was trying to look at getting that done mid-2015, but there were some court cases there that came up. Obviously, it's a complex process as well. I mean, the incentive auction is really setting a template for what's going to perhaps be the model for auctions going forward. So they want to get this right. What's, I guess, the general view on how that is progressing? I mean, do you see this process also kind of getting solved? I mean, obviously, it's a big issue, and I'm sure it will get solved eventually, but do you see how this might progress?
Well, yes, I think it's progressing, right? So, again, this is an exceptionally hard thing that the FCC is trying to do. It's by far the hardest. It's much harder than when I was at the FCC or working on the Hill, when we were working in some of the earlier auctions. We thought those were hard, right? Those were some of the early ones, and so they were hard. But this one is a different auction in kind because it has the reverse auction and the forward auction. It's got a mix of different things, and the most difficult thing is the FCC does not know how much it has to work with, right? This is the first auction ever where they really don't know how much they have to work with, and so they're working hard, and I think they've made some progress. So they've established a variety of ban plans that are possible, but the ban plan theory is now in place. So they have established some rules and are continuing to work on the auction rules. They've issued the auction PN and given important information. They've issued an order resolving that there will be unlicensed operations in the 600 megahertz band, and now they have a second one to look at what the rules ought to be for that. They've done the same thing for the wireless microphones, and so there is steady progress on an exceptionally hard job that they have, and they pushed it back. People can debate on whether that's because of the broadcaster lawsuit or because of something else. I think different people have different opinions on that, but they now have this year to cross all their T's and dot all their I's. The tough thing, I think, for the FCC is that one of the central elements of this auction is not in their hands, and that's how many people participate. And so if you've got lots and lots of participation, well then, even if you have pretty good but not A+ rules, it's going to be a successful auction. But if you're at that edge between whether you have enough people participating or not, then you better make sure your rules are really, really good. And I think they're doing the right thing by trying to assume that they're going to be in the hard cases and design rules for those.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. I mean, does it seem like FCC has done a pretty good job? Because I mean, I know Wheeler, this has been almost a central point of his, is to really get out there and on both sides, get the broadcasters, obviously on board with this, but also he's been rallying the troops on the wireless side to make sure that, hey, you guys have to let people know that you're participating in this, because that then will draw the broadcasters in as well. Do you think that the commission itself is doing a pretty good job of getting the everybody on board on this process?
It's harder to tell on the broadcaster side. I mean, for obvious reasons, people are being cautious about the information that they want to share about whether they're participating or not. It certainly seems that there will be broadcast participation, but it might be quite variable from market to market. We might see some cities where there's a lot of participation and some where there's less, and that's another complication here, is that it's hard to establish a nationwide band plan. And again, going back to that idea of predictability, when there's not a nationwide band plan, when you don't know exactly how many megahertz you're going to have, when you don't know exactly who your neighbor is going to be, there's going to be less predictability, and so the FCC is working to try to increase that predictability. On the other side, on whether there'll be participation by the wireless industry, well, I think that it's quite the opposite problem for them, right? You know, you look at this last auction, and the numbers are jaw-dropping. You know, maybe that means you'll have to talk to economists rather than lawyers about what these numbers mean, right? But to me, it seems that demonstrates a huge hunger for spectrum, and the numbers are high enough that seems like an unsatisfied demand for spectrum. If it was lower, when you go, oh well, people have gotten their fill in the AWS, but when it's that high, that clearly means that there is more demand than there is supply for spectrum. This is also seen in the debate back and forth on the amount of reserved spectrum that there will be. People are debating on how much should be reserved for essentially not AT&T and Verizon versus AT&T and Verizon. If there wasn't intense demand for this spectrum, that wouldn't be a central issue.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, obviously this is, you know, not to bring up what's happening now. I know we can't talk too much about the current ongoing auction, but it does seem like that the amount of money, like you mentioned, that's being thrown around there, it seems like it's kind of maybe changing the game a little bit, because it does show, like you said, there is this huge demand obviously for it. I'm sure the broadcasters are watching it and saying, hey, you know, there could be spurring them on to perhaps even participate even more. But and obviously this could, you know, relieve any pressure when it comes to FirstNet and things like that too. I mean, that's all taken care of now, so that's off the table. So it seems like it's relieving some pressure, but bringing more pressure too.
Yeah, more than FirstNet. I mean, they paid for FirstNet, they paid for the deficit reduction, they paid for all the things that they threw in thinking, well, maybe this will happen or not. It all happened. And so, look, that's, you know, take your hat off to them. That's a big success.
Yeah, there's no doubt. That's been something to watch, that's for sure. But and you kind of mentioned too, you know, obviously the band plan issue there with 600 megahertz and trying to make sure there's enough spectrum for everybody, whether it's the big guys or smaller guys, but also the unlicensed part of it. I want to touch a bit about, I guess, how well you think the government, the FCC, has done in, you know, making sure there's enough unlicensed spectrum out there. Obviously, the unlicensed space has gotten a lot more attention lately. Wi-Fi has become a huge market, a big part of the mobile industry. I know for the Silicon Flatirons events that you attended one, I've attended them before in the past. Wi-Fi and unlicensed spectrum is a big part of their conversation. How's the view, I guess, on how that's been handled? And obviously, I know they're trying to fit more in the 5 gigahertz band, also 3.5, I think, too. How is that playing out, and do you think the government's doing a good enough job of making sure that the unlicensed part of this is also being fed with enough assets too?
Well, the conversation is certainly a lot different than it was even 5 years ago on unlicensed. So I think, so to start with, the foundation is that everybody in the government understands that they have to have a band plan, or excuse me, they have to have a spectrum policy plan that has a balance of licensed and unlicensed. So 5 years ago, maybe not everybody was there, but now I think everybody is there. They understand that in order to keep the wireless economic engine going, you need to have a balance of both. And just like, you know, in your toolbox, you've got hammers and you've got screwdrivers, and you need licensed and you need unlicensed. And certain allocation methods, assignment methods are going to be better for one thing or another. So the unlicensed bands give you really low barriers to entry, a lot of technical flexibility, and the licensed bands give you quality of service assurances and maybe more predictability for investment, some would say. And so it's good to have both, and I think almost everybody agrees to have both. Licensed and unlicensed guys are both saying we need both. So that's good. Now we get to the hard part, which is where do you find it? So unlicensed is growing dramatically, much more than people thought it would 10 years ago when they were first starting to think about additional unlicensed bands. And Wi-Fi is the big reason for that, but Internet of Things may be the next big reason for that. So the FCC is doing a good job at considering a lot of bands. So let's think about which ones those are. We have the 600 megahertz band for the incentive auction. The FCC has said there'll be unlicensed there. They'll put that to the side for a second. The second is the 2.4 gigahertz band. That's the core Wi-Fi band. And there's debate over this Global Star petition for their terrestrial service up at the edge of that. And that's giving people nerves, too, on whether that's going to undermine unlicensed or not. Then you go up to the 3.5 band. There, you've got intense interest by a lot of people on a hybrid solution that would have some more traditional unlicensed and some licensed light there as well. And then all the way up, as you mentioned, to the 5 gigahertz band, where the FCC did a tremendous thing by adding 100 megahertz of new unlicensed spectrum at the Uni 1 band that people are just now rolling out. Now the question is, where do we find for that next 5 years of Wi-Fi growth? Well, it gets hard, and the FCC is running into this, and I think they just need to roll up their sleeves and do it. So the 600 megahertz, they are identifying spectrum, but they're really not, it's not a big piece there. So the unlicensed community had asked for access to a much larger bit of contiguous spectrum than the FCC is considering now. So the FCC has said they will have unlicensed. Now they're debating what the technical rules will be, and those technical rules really, really matter in the 600 megahertz band. And then in the 5 gigahertz band, Uni 1 is done. Now the question is Uni 2B and Uni 4. And those two are ongoing and are difficult proceedings. But the performance of the FCC on those 3 bands, I think, will really define whether the unlicensed industry has the raw materials they need to succeed in the next technological generation.
Interesting, interesting. Yeah, and obviously, too, I mean, when you look at the spectrum management issue, I mean, there's lots of bands out there that are still kind of up in the air. Like you mentioned, the Global Star one, there's a light squared spectrum. I mean, there's all these kind of bands out there that are kind of just sitting there and no one's really sure what to do with them. And obviously, the auctions are showing that there is this demand, whether licensed or unlicensed, for this spectrum. And it seems like the FCC has got a lot going on there.
Well, there's a huge demand, and then this raises a big point, which is, unlike in the past, we can't just push west into the forest, right? There isn't a lot of greenfield spectrum left for us to make easy decisions to satisfy consumer need. And so now the FCC is having to take advantage of these new technologies that allow greater sharing, and it's trying to do so. But and it's trying to do relocation as well, as you're seeing in the AWS auction with governments, and you're seeing in the 600 megahertz band with broadcasters. But whether you are trying to use the tool of relocation or you're trying to use the tool of sharing, it's just a lot harder than going in and bringing new spectrum online. And so the FCC is going to have to work harder for every additional megahertz from now forward. It's trying to do so, but you shouldn't be shocked that it's not easy.
Can't we just go back to the cellular days when the FCC just gave out licenses to people?
Yeah.
Say, hey, just send me a little form and we'll give you a license.
Or before that, my grandfather was actually an FCC spectrum attorney as well back in the broadcast days, and they would just, there's a new service called TV. Let's just create a new TV band. That doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, obviously it's a tough one. Well, maybe, and just wrapping up here, I mean, obviously, you have a lot of experience there at the FCC in DC as well. I mean, there's a lot on the plate there for the FCC, that's for sure. I mean, they've got a lot happening there. Maybe from the outside, there could be some, some worry that there's maybe too much happening and that some of these things might slip through the cracks, and the FCC is not giving full attention to areas where it needs to get the attention. From your experience here at the FCC, I mean, how do you view their ability to handle all of these various tasks that are happening seemingly at one time?
Yeah, it's really hard. I mean, from back in my time there, the FCC is a great agency, and they're trying really hard to do it. But in the end, when you've got so many things happening at the same time, it's a personnel issue as much as anything else. This chairman has got 2 major mergers, the incentive auction, lots of lawsuits, big and small. We've got the network neutrality proceeding. We've got this roaming order that was released today. And then you've got all the normal things that the FCC does. This is an organization of 2,000 people, and keeping all those trains running on time is not easy. It's not easy to be at the FCC. And unlike a lot of the other agencies, you've got 5 commissioners here. It's not just, you're not just in charge. And so I think they've got a hard job in front of them. I think they are trying to do well, but look, some of these things are going slower than people hope, and I think all eyes are on them on whether they're able to make these good decisions that are going to lead to predictable rules and investment in the future.
Yeah, and then obviously Wheeler's got people blocking his driveway too. He's trying to go to work in the morning.
Very exciting stuff. Yeah, that didn't used to happen.
Yeah, exactly. So he's got enough on his plate, that's for sure. But well, Paul, we definitely appreciate the great insight today on this topic. This is obviously something that can be discussed for hours and hours and hours on end. But we definitely appreciate kind of the update there on what's happening there. Hopefully we can touch base again soon on this topic. But again, thanks for the time today. We appreciate it.
Happy to do it. Thanks for the opportunity.
All right.